An example is the security industry. And so people struggle, and they've got a bucky that goes out and drops off pay slips and drops off timesheets and rosters and gets leave forms from people. And it feels like that's wild in the modern world, but that's literally still how they do it. And we've come across employers that have 10,000 plus employees that are printing out 10,000 pieces of paper every month or more. And so our solution allows them to very, very quickly disseminate this information via WhatsApp.
Welcome, builders, to How Would You Build It? The podcast that dives deep into the dynamic world of startups and product creation right here in South Africa and Africa. This show is more than just interviews. Every week we sit down with the brilliant minds to provide a masterclass for building digital products amidst the challenges and opportunities unique to our continent. From seasoned founders to dynamic product managers, we uncover the unique stories and strategies behind some of the most innovative digital products being built. So for all the aspiring founders and product builders out there, you'll discover that each episode is a wealth of practical wisdom and local and actionable insights. Make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to our podcasts and connect with us on social media for even more content. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, builders, to another episode of How Would You Build It? It's episode 63, and I'm really, really excited. And I'm not just saying that because I've got a really good guest on for us today. But first and foremost, Renier, co-host, how are you doing? Long time no see.
Yeah, lekker, Bobby. Good to be back, and excited for the chat today.
Yeah, me too. We're chatting to the co-founder of JemHR. Her name is Caroline, and I'm really excited for our conversation. Caroline, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. I love chatting about my startup, as every founder will tell you.
Yeah, as we were talking offline, everyone wants to have a startup now. But yeah, you've got an incredible story, Caroline, and obviously I want to chat about your talk that you gave at a product meetup recently about getting to understand your users and going into what you're building with empathy, and it resonates for a product manager 100%. So I definitely want to dive into that thinking and how you're approaching your solution. But first and foremost, I mean, I think Gem is really building a name for itself. The solution is super exciting, and I think the fact that it's based off WhatsApp is just where everyone's lips are at the moment. I'm in the space now and I just can't escape that word. It's incredible. So do you just want to tell us what your solution is and how you sort of took that initial approach?
Of course. So JemHR is essentially building a tool to connect frontline workforces. So we have a side where we offer what we call fair financial services. So for employees, they can use a product called Earned Wage Access and access a couple of other benefits. But first and foremost, we help employers connect with frontline workforces. So in South Africa, we have this unique situation where people don't have the latest smartphones. They don't have very high digital literacy, and data is very expensive. And so while people are really smartphone savvy, they're not going to be using very advanced apps. They're not going to be using a hell of a lot of email on their phones, which means how do I, as a business owner, get information, basic transactional HR information out to my employees if they're spread across large geographic areas? And an example is the security industry. And so people struggle, and they've got a bucky that goes out and drops off pay slips and drops off timesheets and rosters and gets leave forms from people. And it feels like that's wild in the modern world, but that's literally still how they do it. And we've come across employers that have 10,000 plus employees that are printing out 10,000 pieces of paper every month or more. And so our solution allows them to very, very quickly disseminate this information via WhatsApp. And on the employee end, everybody knows how to use WhatsApp. The friction is almost zero to register, sign up. It's very secure. And that employee can get that information really, really quickly and on the go. So that's what we do at Gem.
Yeah, amazing. I think it's such a credible solution. But what's the delivery rate of what you can achieve using WhatsApp is insane. And the fact, like you mentioned, that just almost everybody has a smartphone and has WhatsApp connected to it now in South Africa. Renier, just need to get your insights here because we talk about WhatsApp we've had this conversation on the podcast a few times. Did you ever think about plugging HR into it?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it makes a lot of sense because ultimately, it comes down to what app do people have on their devices. The days of downloading multiple apps just it's over, and a lot of people have realized that and have converged on WhatsApp. I just think it's such a practical way to do it. Caroline, I'd be interested to hear like what kind of objections do you get to this, and why aren't everybody using it at the moment? Why are there still people that drop off paper-based pay slips?
Mm. I mean, I think that one of the most major objections is the sort of old guard that think WhatsApp's a terribly unsafe way to deliver something with personal information on it, which is kind of ironic, right? Because what's happening is there's a person with a bakkie filled with unprotected documents that land in the wrong hands really, really easily. And people never think about copy when it comes to handing out pieces of paper, right? We never think of it. We think of it as something part of the digital world, but that's way less safe than putting something on somebody's phone. And if you think about you and I that get bank statements delivered to our email, the password on that bank statement is our ID number. It's not like that's some kind of bank vault level security. And so that's an objection we get, particularly from corporate companies that have kind of global policies against WhatsApp. Everybody else is very game for it. So yeah, and you were right, Bobby, to talk about the delivery rate. That like the engagement is insane, and it's about meeting people where they already are, rather than trying to lead them kicking and screaming to some other app where there's not a lot of incentive for them to be.
Can you tell me? I know getting exposed to the industry, it's not a straightforward thing to say, hey, we're going to plug in. You have to become potentially a business, a partner supplier with Meta. Can you just explain that pain, or not the pain, but that process of becoming a WhatsApp sort of provider in the country?
Yes, so a lot of the pain has actually been taken away in the very recent history. So we had what you call the WhatsApp Business API. We're on the Cloud API at the moment. Now, literally as little as 2 years ago, you had to go through an intermediary to get there, like an Infobip or a Twilio. I know Clickatel in South Africa had the license there. And literally overnight, WhatsApp started to see these really interesting use cases emerge, and they decided to open up that Cloud API to literally anybody. So it's actually very easy to get in there. It's quite complicated, the various levels that you can get on, but the barriers to entry are now extremely low. And so our first version of our product was through intermediary, and it was a lot more expensive. Now the pricing is more competitive, and anybody can plug in and build products. And in fact, we've started conversations directly with product managers at Meta who are kind of blown away by how WhatsApp is used, particularly in the global South, because it's not the same in the US where everybody has an iPhone and people flick between iMessage and WhatsApp. In South Africa, 101% of people use WhatsApp. And so you find these really interesting use cases emerging, and they love to just jump on calls with companies like us and understand how we're using those things. So I think what's happening at Meta is that they're realizing that there's a lot of monetization here. There's a lot of interest from emerging markets, and they are innovating in order to accommodate companies like us.
Amazing. And do you think that this solution is pegged only in South Africa, or what is your kind of view on the global front? I was chatting to someone from Argentina today who got excited about WhatsApp because it's big there, but he's saying that that's not the case. People use Snapchat to talk in some countries. I'm just interested to know what kind of views or like insights you have into the reach of WhatsApp globally.
Yeah. So I think, again, particularly in emerging markets, it tends to be the dominant one. There are other ones that trend up. I mean, even locally in South Africa, we have an incredible platform called Moya app. That's a data-free platform. I have a lot of respect for what they've built with absolutely no above-the-line marketing, and it's a very popular app. It's obviously not near the size of WhatsApp yet, but there's so many possibilities on platforms like that. But WhatsApp remains extremely dominant. Again, particularly in emerging markets. And I think with the innovation that's going on with products being built on WhatsApp, and they've now launched payments in Brazil, that it's really exciting. We've got our local startup Stitch that's spun off their other division, Wigwag, that's allowing SMEs to accept payments on WhatsApp. So much exciting stuff happening there. I don't see us moving away quickly. We've actually been asked by investors quite a lot, what is the risk of being so dependent on WhatsApp? We are very, very bullish about it. Of course, there's risks associated with being dependent on a particular platform, but we've only seen growth. We've only seen innovation from Meta because they are seeing the possibilities. And it's not free. They're making a lot of money out of this thing. But I think what we're seeing is people are willing to pay for that level of engagement that you cannot achieve on SMS or email.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions actually, but that is quite something. I think mitigating risk, I think, pegging something against one solution is quite a thing. I just want to understand, are you doing anything to mitigate that risk?
Yes. So WhatsApp goes down every now and again, and we've had a few of those anxious days in our lives at Gem. So we one of our first MVPs was on USSD, and we've kept a USSD line going. But as you both know, the experience is way less rich. We obviously use SMS as a sort of auxiliary service, and we also have a Mobi site. But again,
Okay.
as you can hear, it's all about being able to communicate with people who are not necessarily the most digitally savvy, are not typically used to setting passwords and using email on their phones. And in fact, phones also have a space limitation. That means that sometimes you have to delete an app in order to just install another one. I've got like a million stories about I've come across large corporates in South Africa where their retail staff have to get their payslip from an app. They literally every month download the app, get the payslip, and then delete the app and reinstall what was ever there before.
Oh
So
my gosh.
there are these constraints that people just don't consider because you and I are on the top of the range iPhone or Android phone or whatever it is, and space just is not an issue. It is an issue on lower end phones, and particularly if people have not grown up resetting passwords and things, that becomes a major point of friction for them. And that's another thing that we can get around on WhatsApp.
Amazing. Renia, I was going to dive into, understanding the solution, so the security guard use case, and then kind of the value it unlocks for users. Do you want to go on your route and then we come back to that?
Yeah, sure. So Caroline, I'm very interested to understand the unit economics of HR tech SaaS business, and I'll tell you why. I've seen many products like this, and the barrier to entry in terms of getting a very first payslip product down is respectfully, not that complicated. So, a lot of people try it and they build a solution like that. But then the tricky part, obviously, is there's a lot of players in the space, but also the cost that you can generate per user is, I mean, you're up against paper and, making that, I know you guys have a very affordable solution. So, I mean, how did you think about the unit economics going into this? How much has changed, and how do you think about it now? Like, what are some of the interesting things you can share?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And you're quite right to highlight that there aren't huge budgets in HR for this type of thing. We know this from some of the global statistics, even in markets that are spending more on HR software. And in South Africa, I would say it's even lower. In fact, most South African organizations use a payroll as their one and only kind of HR information system, or HRIS. So all of their people data is on there. And I'm talking about less kind of corporate organizations, which is where our market lies. So they would have a payroll system only. They wouldn't have a database for employees. They wouldn't have an applicant tracking system for their recruitment, etc. And so that means there's not a budget line item for this thing. So you called out the right thing there. But I think the efficiencies that they gain by moving away from paper, and particularly the bucky that delivers this paper, cannot be overstated. So again, our ideal market is distributed workforces. So not necessarily a place where there's 500 people in one building, but organizations who have 500 staff across 40 buildings. And that means you have to actually pay several area managers to literally go on all of these sites every day and manage basic correspondence, including queries, payslips, etc. So if you look at payslips alone, I mean, the gross margins are fine. They're great. But there's so many problems to solve there that we are confident that over time we can build up a reasonable per user charge, and we charge on a SaaS basis there. So that's the one end of the unit economics, and we're still building out that solution. There's leave, there's recruitment and onboarding, there's a bunch of other places that we can go, and we sort of have built out some of those things. On the other end, though, there's a monetization opportunity with the employees. And that's where our business actually started at Earned Wage Access, which essentially is a service that allows an employee, instead of going to a loan shark or a payday lender, they actually advance a portion of their wages early from their employer in a very controlled way, so that they are not paying extortionate interest rates. And so they're not in any danger from loan sharks, but also we're able to offer that service because we're essentially lending money against payroll risk, not against individual credit risk. And so there's this element of monetizing on the employee side as well. We also are in the process of building out that functionality to offer other fair financial services to employees. And so we have two ways to monetize one individual that's on our platform. And that's really where we see a future for the business. And the margins on those products are also great.
That's super interesting. So I'd like to dive in because you're talking about these area managers, you're talking about the multiple buildings. You did this talk that I mentioned at the start of the episode, where you spoke about being empathetic with your design approach to your product, and it was fantastic. And I want to get you to remind me what those there were three themes, and I remember the last one because I'm living that. But I think just share that security guard use case, because I thought that was super fascinating for people to really understand who this solution is appealing to.
Fantastic. So I guess part of the talk was sharing my personal journey and how I got into product. So I'm 39 years old. I got into product at 35 years old. So I'm a rookie. And I learned just really through curiosity. And one of the things that is curious to me is learning about people whose day-to-day lives are so different from my own that every assumption I have is incorrect, because that's the way you learn, and it's very, very interesting. And so we stumbled across the security industry in South Africa, and you and I probably live in neighborhoods where there's armed response people. We work in buildings where there's security officers at the front. We go and conduct our driver's license or government stuff at buildings where there are security guards. There are over 500,000 active security guards in South Africa at any given time. And this is an industry that works on a contract basis. And so an employer will contract out to each of these different buildings and send their security officers out there. But what you have is an employer that employs 3,500 people who are spread across 400 work sites and who never, ever come to head office, never meet their HR department, and certainly can't, they're not just hopping on the phone or huddling somebody on Slack. They are people who have very, very limited resources, and they are paid a fixed wage under the regulations of the security industry in South Africa. And so how do you communicate with those people? How do you get emergency messages out to them when there's a flood in KZN or taxi violence in Cape Town? How do you exchange basic documentation? For example, a security guard has to get what they call a SERA certification on an annual basis, and they have to submit that document in order to continue to practice legally as a security guard. So now I'm an employer, I'm an HR team of 5 people, and I've got to make sure that 3,500 SERA certificates are updated every year. I've also got to make sure that pay slips get out to everybody. I've also got to make sure that timesheets and rosters get out to everybody. So we estimate that there's a minimum of 7 pieces of paper per employee per month that need to do the rounds. So who's doing that? Somebody has to do that, and it's got to be on paper. And so we could talk about apps, but it's really, really difficult to get people to download apps. We know this throughout the continent. And then there's email. People just simply don't have email addresses. So what are you going to do? You're going to do it on paper, and it's also a compliance issue. So somebody has to have proof that that paper was delivered to the person. In fact, the Labor Department goes and does inspections, and you have to prove that you've submitted pay slips to your employees, because that is a right of a South African employee to receive a formal pay slip. So you have to prove that you've done it. And so there's this desperate need in these industries that have distributed workforces for something in between email and a piece of paper. And for us, that's WhatsApp. And the sign-up rates are evidence that that's a really effective way to communicate with people. And what's more, it's really tough to reach people who are less digitally present and less digitally active. But WhatsApp is so well used that it's so intuitive to people that there's no training required. You give people a number, they register, and they're up and running within a second.
Amazing. I love that. And I think what's great about this use case is that I'm never seeing a security guard or a company the same again after your stories that you shared. Like, I can't unthink it now. Thank you for that. But what it got me thinking is every time I think about it, it's like, what value is JemHR providing these people, these security guards that are at all these distributed locations? I mean, all of a sudden they have their pay slips and all these forms at their fingertips, where just the other day they didn't. So what is I just want to like untap, where the value chain actually ends, because I think that must unlock such great value, not just for the company, but for the people that are actually getting these documents delivered to their phones.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the very sort of obvious practical stuff, which is that as a South African employee, we're a country that has sort of great workers' rights. And one of those rights is to that kind of information, the information I need to perform my role, the information I need to check that I was paid the right amount of money. And by the way, security guards' pay is regulated. So that means that when they work overtime, there's extra money. And if you're a person that's earning 5,000 Rand a month in a South African economy and supporting a large extended family, that extra 250 bucks for your Sunday or your overtime shift matters. And so my payslip is something I'm looking forward to receiving and looking at. Whereas you or I, who earn a fixed salary every month, and we sort of trust the people in our payroll teams, we're not really checking our payslip. It's the same thing every month. There's nothing to read there. So making sure that that information gets to people early means that they can submit their queries early. In the security industry, there's at least a 5% error rate on these things because of the complications of calculating shifts and who was where when, and because, again, of the distributed nature of these workforces. And so my right as an employee is to say, hang on a minute, you got my pay wrong, because I actually was there on that night, and there's a 250 Rand missing from my paycheck. That money makes a huge difference to me. If I get my pay slip 10 days after I'm paid, that significantly reduces the accuracy with which I can go back and query that pay slip. And it's also frustrating for me because it just is a lack of transparency in what I'm owed as an employee. And so there's a fundamental element of rights and dignity here in terms of just information flowing more efficiently, which allows payroll teams to then respond to those queries and correct their errors. And there's no malintent on the side of the payroll teams. They have the most extraordinary job to try and figure out who was on these 400 sites across the country, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So it helps everybody. But then there's a softer element, which is connecting employees to their employer, who is this kind of ethereal being to them. And we talked to a lot of our customers and said, how many people work for your company? And they typically just count the people that work on their site. So say we're in a building now, and next door there's a office building where one of our clients has guards deployed. And there's 2 on night shift and 2 on day shift. And so in their world, in their organization, it's the 4 of them that they hand over shifts, and it's their area manager. They're never really meeting anybody else in the business. And so if you have a line of communication and you have messaging coming through from your employer, and you have a sense of, I can get training in this company, I can get promoted in this company, my employer cares about me, because we had with one organization, when the taxi strikes happened in Cape Town, there was a lot of really horrific violence. They encourage their security guards to stay on their sites, to shelter in place, and they provided meals to those people, because the dangerous part was those people trying to get home, rather that their family stayed safely in their homes and they stayed safely at work for extra time. And they sent those communications through Gem to communicate that to people, to provide them with advice. And so there's a lot of benefits that you can get out of this if people can get used to this new way of communicating with one another. But isn't it extraordinary to think that in the so-called communication age, that line of communication was not open prior to Gem coming into some of those businesses?
Yeah, that's crazy. Hey? And like you say, it's things that we take for granted. Like it's insane. And I think that's where I want to sort of lead us into now, is that talk that you did, and it's about designing with empathy and understanding your users. And you shared some great stories, some great pictures of how you guys are actually interacting face to face with your users and getting to know them intimately. Can you just explain that and why you feel it's so important and has contributed to your growth? I mean, you just told me offline how you guys are growing at such an exponential rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to also start with hindsight is 2020, and I sound like I know what I'm doing now, but I really don't know what I'm doing, and I certainly didn't 4 years ago when we started the business. So when we launched what was then SmartWage and is now Gem, we were an earned wage access business only, and this is a very competitive space, and there are several competitors in South Africa that are doing very well. And we hit a point in our journey when we were saying, you know, things are ticking along, but ticking along is not good enough for a startup. You eventually run out of time and money, and we need something else. And that resulted in us saying, let us talk to our 10, I think we only had 10 clients, or maybe we had 15, but let's get a meeting with 10 clients and spend an hour with them. And I remember putting together the questionnaire, and it was kind of like, how's your day going? And what was irritating about today? And it was literally the definition of spray and pray, right? So we went in there going, we need to learn more about these people. What frustrates them? What are their roles in the organization? And literally through that, like very open-ended questioning, these really interesting trends began to emerge, which is we can't do our job of managing human beings in our business because we are drowning under these 7,000 pieces of paper every single month. And this it emerged from employer to employer to employer to employer. It was quite extraordinary. And that was, I think, a big turning point for us in understanding we've missed this. We've totally missed this thing. And by sitting down with 10 clients for 1 hour each, we literally were able to pivot the business from that one research experiment. And that enabled us to further proliferate our earned wage access product, because now this was like more than just an earned wage access product. We were offering the HR side of things as well, and it was more of a one-stop shop. And that was the trigger for us to say, okay, we need relationships with these people. We need to be friends to the extent that I can call them up and say, I'd like to come on site tomorrow and literally just watch you work for half the day. And it was again, in hindsight, it sounds very, very neat and easy, but it was a baptism of fire, and it's very hard to prioritize that. I'd love to actually hear from you, Bobby, because you're more seasoned product manager than I am, but you're busy in the day. It's quite hard to justify spending the whole day with a customer when you've kind of got deadlines to meet and you kind of sort of know what to build. And relationship building and having lunch with people and trying to connect with people feels like it's something that should be done once or twice a year, whereas actually in reality, the learnings are justified once a week, basically,
exactly,
or more.
Yeah, exactly. And the little gems, and it's in those indirect questions and open-ended questions where they drop those little insight bombs. I mean, and it's about just, I don't know, I guess active listening and taking note, and just always being open to waiting for that little nugget to drop when you're talking to them in that open-ended sort of environment. So yeah, and do it regularly. I'm actually you really like got me what's the word, motivated. Like, we'll get into it, but immerse yourself, which I'm like, the way you put it, I was like, yes, one needs to immerse themselves. Rene, what's your thoughts on this so far?
Yeah, so Caroline, something I see with a lot of founders, which I think they find really complicated, and I'd love to get your take on it, is that you have an idea, right? And you invest so much emotional energy into this idea. You invest a lot of money into it, time. You've sacrificed a lot to build this specific idea. And then when you engage users, you most of the time hear what you thought was a good idea is maybe not that great, and they actually want something slightly different or maybe completely different, right? And I think what a lot of founders do is they actually try and avoid that, because it's so hard to hear that this thing that you've invested so much in is needs to go to the bin, because that's not going to work. Like, how do you think about that? Like, how do you, or was it something that you also found a bit challenging, and what do you do to overcome that, and just jump in and go, let the users dictate where this needs to go?
Yeah, so there's two things here. Firstly, yes, that happened to us a lot, and we went through the entire roller coaster of emotions around that. And we're only human. Myself and my co-founder Simon are first-time founders, and I think that we were in denial for probably the first year and a half. And when I mentioned that we started with that research phase of ours, it was really, really tough to admit to one another that we needed something more and we needed something different. And it's one of those things that if you haven't had product market fit, you don't really know what it's like. But as soon as you get it, it's very obvious that you have it and that you did not have it beforehand. So I think, I mean, we were the two of us were reflecting this morning on the interpersonal skills required to be a founder are far more important than any other skill you could possibly come in with. And that is being able to be honest with each other, rely on one another for our respective strengths and weaknesses, and go through those moments together where your heart literally sinks. You've been working on something for a year and a half, and you are going out to ask people the question, have I been wasting my time for a year and a half? There's nothing, I don't have any tips. There's nothing easy about that. It's terrible. But obviously, if you want to keep going for another year and a half, you're going to need to ask those questions over and over. I don't think you also ever like learn that fully. You have to keep holding yourself accountable for those types of things and asking your customers those questions. There's one other thing that I want to say though, and this sometimes sounds a little bit arrogant, but sometimes there's a vision that customers don't necessarily see at the beginning. And that's one of the hardest things to trust yourself about, which is to say, you know, if somebody goes and says to a customer, are you interested in X, Y, or Z? It's very easy for the customers to say, yes, I'm interested, to be nice to you. We all know about the mom test. Or to say, no, I'm not interested in that. Or if I'm suggesting a completely different way of managing things, they may not really see that vision yet. And I think, and again, I don't know what the answer here is, but I'm trying to learn to trust myself on a kind of a broader vision of what HR for frontline workers could look like in 5 years' time with our product that maybe the customers aren't quite seeing yet. And so you've got to try not to have too much hubris and be like we all want to be Steve Jobs, but you could go off feeling like really on your own and feel like Steve Jobs and screw it up. Or you could really just have this vision and listen to what customers are saying and see slightly further down the path than customers do. So there is that little bit of caution there that you've got to listen to customers, but they're not going to write your roadmap for you. You've got to have some vision beyond that. And that vision can only come from real depth of understanding with customers. So it's uncertain. That is the bedrock of everything startup. And you've got to figure out your way through.
I love that you added that, Caroline. I was reading a quote earlier today of Elon Musk saying he doesn't trust customer interviews because customers don't know what they want. And it made me think, and I actually agree to a certain degree, because if they knew what they wanted, they wouldn't have had buckies with paper delivering stuff to begin with. They would have found another way to do it. So I love it. I completely agree. So it's about engaging and understanding how things work in order to craft that vision of how it could work in the future, and then going back and presenting it as hey, this is where stuff is heading. Like, this is the benefits you could get from utilizing this. So, and I think that's a mistake a lot of product people or founders even make early on, is they try and take the advice literal of, let your users tell you what they want, but it's not literally what they want. It's just use the information they're conveying in a way to craft that vision of where you need to go.
Exactly.
It's a tightrope walk though as well, Renia. It's one of those things where you can't go through your whole life saying customers don't know what they want, because to some degree they do. So it is, as I said a few times, I'm trying to learn to trust myself on certain things, because you also have to be incredibly humble when you do have an idea, in letting go of that idea if customers aren't resonating with it. So 100% right.
Yeah, I think if you have billions of personal net worth, then you don't care. Then you just do whatever you want.
You really don't care. The other funny thing I think is about communication, and this I learned by accident, and I didn't really read it in a book anyway, but this idea of pitching your idea to a customer and then saying, not really, and then saying in a totally different way, and suddenly they've jumped on board with this concept. And I guess we all know about the elevator pitch and how differently you can talk about something, but I'll give you an example. One of the first things we launched after our Payslips product was the ability to send out segmented broadcast communications to your employees via WhatsApp. And we sort of launched it as, you have a communications tool. And one of the examples on our deck was a little a communication sample that said Motivation Monday, and someone was sending out a motivational quote. And literally somebody looked at the deck and just said, first of all, we don't communicate to our employees. And second of all, nobody has time to send out a Motivation Monday message. Literally how we positioned this in the slide had completely messed up that sale. When we tried something different, which is to say, you can send out emergency communications and you can send out job adverts to your employees. You didn't call it comms or, you know, engagement, whatever. You had a different name for it. Suddenly they got it and they bought the product straight away. And I guess that's a positioning thing, but it's also when you're presenting an idea to somebody in a like a research interview or whatever, you need to try different phrases so that people understand what you're saying. And that's another kind of art rather than science.
Yeah, I think what's resonated with me in the conversation that's unfolded is fall in love with the problem and not the solution. You know, the more you understand the problem and you understand the people with the problem, the more when you're immersed with them and you're kind of engaging with them and having all these conversations and understanding them, the better you can come up with that vision that you were talking about earlier and seeing it in the future. Because you're not married to a current state. You're kind of looking at what's possible in the future, and I think that's super important. Caroline, for those people that are not familiar with getting down and intimate, let's say, with the users, what kind of advice could you give for them to immerse themselves? I mean, I know we've got different versions. I mean, there's the security guard, but there's so many different use cases out there, different products out there. How could people immerse themselves with understanding their users and their customers?
I mean, the most basic advice is literally just to ask. And I spent so much time worrying about bothering people. So one of the most important things we did was go and sit in the actual HR offices of these security companies and literally look at what they did all day. And I was so nervous to ask. And then I did ask initially, and I said, I'll come at whatever time you want. And she said, well, I'm HR and I get in at 6 a.m. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll have to be there at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. And it was a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift, which is what their security guards were. And I said, I will try not to bother you. We know you're busy, but I literally just want to be there to observe. And people were so generous with us. And I think we forget that people want to be seen. And there's so many people, particularly in these industries, that they don't get invited to conferences or nice dinners or things like that. And people aren't necessarily interested in learning about their workplace and how their work goes. And so it's just really just that simple, that people want to be heard and seen. So I think people are more generous than we give them credit for. And then the second thing is, just to show curiosity and to ask a lot of questions. I mean, one of the things we learned when we went on site with these security companies is they literally phone on a radio every site to check who's there and that everybody's arrived on their shift on time. But they also phone every site, every hour, on the hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because the main element of compliance and security is your people need to be there. And you can be fined by your customer if you don't have 3 guards on the site where you're supposed to have 3 guards. So there's literally 2 people that sit there and they make those calls throughout the day, and then they record it on a spreadsheet. That's a whole nother problem to solve. If anyone wants to do that, talk to me. But it's wild.
Let's chip some people.
Weirdly, the chips never work.
Before we start wrapping up, you mentioned how you guys have grown as a company in a short amount of time, and that's quite tricky and hard to manage. And I think something I'm wanting to dive into is leadership. Can you give advice on some leadership sort of traits that you feel is needed when you're leading a startup and when you're finding a product market fit and you're growing at the rate that you guys are?
Funny enough, it's very similar to the customer interviews, which is have the courage to ask what you don't want to hear the answer to. And I've had a few conversations in my time, particularly exit interviews where someone's leaving the business and you're going to ask them a really direct question. Why are you leaving? What could we have done to avoid you leaving? And then developing some hypotheses about why this person is leaving. I've asked, I think I posted this on LinkedIn once, but I've asked a person, did you leave because there were only men in your team and you were the only woman in the team? And she said yes, straight away. I didn't want the answer to that question. I'm a female founder. I pride myself on building a diverse team. And there I had somebody leaving because on her team, there were no other women. It's literally the only way to learn is like hearing the negative stuff. And the reason why I say that's most important is that you can have all the leadership traits in the world, but you need to benchmark how you're doing. You need to listen to your people. you could have a person, you could disregard somebody's feedback, and that's fair enough if they don't fit with the culture of your company, and you've got to figure that out. And that's the same discussion that we had a moment ago, Rainier, about customer feedback and whether they know what they want or not. There's so much value there. And literally surviving as a startup is about your ability to learn and adapt. And that's on the business side, but as well as the people side. And it's the recognition that between human beings, these barriers build up, and the only thing that can take away that barrier is having the hard conversation, learning and changing something. And it's kind of like we've all been with that colleague that starts becoming disengaged, and you think, oh, they're going to leave. You can do something about that. You can sit them down and go, are you going to leave? And if you're going to leave, is there anything I can do to stop you? And that's such a hard conversation to have, but you have to do it. And I'm giving myself a pep talk here because I had one of these conversations yesterday, and I have to continually hype myself up to have these things. It's not easy. I don't find it easy. I don't consider myself a person with high interpersonal skills. I'm actually quite introverted, and I find it quite draining. But I've learned so much by just asking the hard questions. And it's like a little bit of a dagger when you hear the answer, but you kind of, okay, cool, we can learn from that and do better next time. And that's the only way. It's the same with the business. Ask about your dumb idea, figure out if it is a dumb idea or a good idea, and go from there. But if you don't, then you could literally just be going down the wrong path.
Awesome. I love that. Empathy inside and outside the business.
We try.
and that ongoing tightrope, right? Because I mean, people, both customers and employees, are emotional beings, right? And sometimes, sometimes you can get feedback that there's something you should do something about, and sometimes it's just that person having to deal with something in their life or going through a difficult season. So once 100%. Again, you can't just take it in and go, cool, we're going to change everything because someone's having a bad few months. You're going to have to figure out where's the future vision of what this company needs to look like in a similar way. You're crafting that vision for your customers, also craft that vision for the workplace you're trying to build.
I couldn't agree more, Rainier. And it's that moment when you also have to grow up and realize this is not our family, and this is not a person's family, this is the business, and the greater good or the good of the pack is more important than the good of the individual typically. And so you've got to treat people in line with your personal values and the values of the company, but at the same time it's not about kowtowing to a particular individual or being reactive about it. You have to pick your own path, and sometimes that's not the same as what was reflected in feedback. So 100%, it's a tightrope. And don't always get it right.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept. I think I read it on LinkedIn actually. Stop calling your work colleagues family. I'll be the first one to swear on this episode. They say it's bullshit.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and you kind of like people need to get those familial connections from partners and family and friends and things like that, and family love is unconditional, and it's not unconditional in a business. You have to perform, you have to some degree, assimilate into the culture or ascribe to the same set of values as the company. And like that same statement can be interpreted as incredibly toxic or incredibly practical and constructive. And it is about finding the right fit for an individual and the workplace. And we don't always get that right too, but that is the most complicated part. The founder relationship and the relationship with all of your colleagues and your employees, recruiting the right people into the business. It's the hardest part, hands down.
Interesting. Thank you for that. So Rainier, before we get into our famous lightning round, is there anything you'd like to ask Caroline around the business, the WhatsApp, the industry, the leadership, and building with empathy?
Yeah. So Caroline, maybe just you've got quite a unique setup. Simon is from the UK, right?
Yes.
And
he's South African, but he lives in the UK.
Does he still spend time there and here? How does that work? How does that dynamic play out? And how have you experienced that?
Yeah, so when we founded the business, I actually was randomly introduced to him while I was studying in the United States. He was living in London. He had started the business with 2 South African friends. And it was a random introduction. I just finished a master's degree and we got on really well. And so we decided to make it more of a permanent thing. I hadn't met him in person for the first 5 months after I joined the founding team. I hadn't met any of them. So it was probably the riskiest decision I've ever made in my life, but it was COVID and people were making weird decisions. So I jumped on the bandwagon. And then he has lived in London for the last 4 years. And so I have been the kind of on the ground founder. But because it's been the COVID era, there's been, it's been possible for that to happen. And he's been very good about coming to South Africa many times a year, which is that, it costs him something in terms of his personal life. But I'm happy to say he's made the decision to move back to South Africa. And I think that is going to be important for our scaling phase of the business. He's in London right now, but we have also acknowledged that a founder relationship is really important to the health of the business. If we're fighting, the business is not running optimally, and we've never agreed about anything in our entire 4-year history together. So we need to work on our relationship. We need to communicate often, and us being in the same city is very helpful to that. So we actually did the hard part first, and hopefully it'll get easier from here.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, it's amazing that it's come this far with someone sitting in a country which works quite a lot differently to how things work here. And I suppose when you chat about product and direction, it helps when people are on the same location. So, but yeah, excited for him coming back. Be good to see him around as well. So looking forward to
that. He'll be around very soon.
All right, to wrap up, Caroline, is our lightning round, and it's just a few questions. First thing that comes to mind, shout it out, and then we'll let you go on your merry way, and thank you for joining. So the first question, easy one, a book that you would recommend any founder or person building product to read.
I'm going to be difficult here. I'm not actually a big believer in business books. I think people should learn about the world. So read something about philosophy, even read a novel about people and human beings, anything else. My favorite book in the world is The Poisonwood Bible, and it's actually a great parable about bad products. It's about American missionaries in the 1960s in the Congo, and essentially just trying to sort of press their ideas on local people and just having absolutely no clue. And it's kind of like pressing a product on people who don't want your product because you haven't checked with them if they want that. It's a phenomenal book, and I'm a lover of literature. I'm not a big fan of business books. Sorry about that. I don't fit into our industry in that way.
No, it's good. It's good to get different perspectives. So that's freaking awesome. So then if people aren't going to get advice from a book and they got it from experience, what experience in your career would you give to a new founder or someone early in their founder journey?
I would say talk to customers. It's so trite, but you need to do it. I wish I'd done it a year and a half earlier. I wish I'd also built the confidence to just go up to people and say, would you mind giving me some of your time and talking to me? And that rule is the same for advisors. Our business would not exist unless we got good advice. My co-founder, Simon, is super good at relationships and getting advice from people. You both met him. He's a really person, and I'm less like that. He's taught me about that. Our business would have died 1,000 deaths 1,000,000 times over had we not had amazing people giving us advice along the way. And that's the same habit, right? Is going to people and saying, I don't know what to do here. Can you help me? And it's the same with talking to customers. And I see this with younger founders sometimes, like you try to give them some advice, or you say, oh, I could come in and do something, and they say, no, I've got it figured out. I just need to get it done. And I think that's the difference between my previous career and all of our previous careers, is that you were striving for individual brilliance, and you could succeed and work your way up a corporate ladder as an individual by working really hard and doing the right things. When you're founding a business, you cannot be good at it all. And you have to lean on other people, and you have to lean on customers, and you've got to learn to have those conversations, as uncomfortable as they are sometimes. Sometimes they're really fun.
Exactly. Love that. The last question, if Caroline had a billboard, what would it read?
Oh my gosh. A little bit odd. That's it.
I'm a little bit odd.
Yes.
Full stop. Hashtag. Cool. Well, Caroline, I've always thoroughly enjoy our engagement. So thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights with us on the podcast. So yeah, we're wishing you all the best and looking forward to watching your journey. Renee, anything before we say goodbye?
No, love what you guys are building, Caroline, and excited to see where it's going. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Bobby and Rainier. I am an avid reader and watcher of what you guys do, and I think you're transforming the local space for us. So absolutely love it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Where can we find you very quickly?
JemHR.com.
Done and seen.
Okay.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you so much. It'll be
Guys,
out
thank
next
you so
Nice one.
much.